Did you know that over 2 billion people live in countries where socialist policies shape their daily lives? From the healthcare you receive to the way your government manages its economy, socialism is more than just an idea, it's a global reality. But despite its influence, many people still don't fully understand what socialism is or what it truly means. Some think it's just about taking away wealth, while others believe it's the key to solving massive global issues like inequality and climate change. In this video, we'll uncover the truth behind socialism. We'll dive into its history, challenge the myths, and explore how socialist policies are changing the world today. Is socialism a path to equality and fairness, or a dangerous road to government control? Stick with us as we break down the facts and give you a fresh perspective on one of the most misunderstood political ideologies in the world. You might be surprised by what you discover. Chapter 1: The Roots of Socialism. From utopia to revolution, socialism's roots can be traced back to the early 19th century, with thinkers like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels leading the way. They believed that capitalism, with its focus on profit, was inherently flawed. Marx's The Communist Manifesto, 1848, argued that the working class, or proletariat, was being exploited by the wealthy capitalist class, or bourgeoisie. His solution? A revolution that would overthrow the system and establish a classless society. While Marx's ideas sparked revolutions, they also led to intense debates about how socialism should be implemented. Before Marx, earlier thinkers like Robert Owen and Charles Fourier proposed utopian visions of socialist societies. These thinkers believed in building perfect communities based on equality and cooperation. Though their ideas were idealistic, they were the foundation for later socialist thought. A famous quote from Owen says, "The system of society is a false one, built upon a bad foundation." This radical belief in equality would later be a core element in socialist movements. The first socialist experiments in the 19th century weren't revolutionary, but were attempts to create ideal communities. Owen, for example, built a model factory town in New Lanark, Scotland, where he implemented social reforms like better housing and education for workers. While these experiments weren't always successful, they showed the possibility of a society focused on collective well-being rather than profit. As the Industrial Revolution unfolded, social inequalities grew. The gap between rich factory owners and poor workers widened dramatically. Engels, in The Condition of the Working Class in England, 1845, detailed how industrial workers lived in squalor while factory owners grew wealthier. His observations gave Marx's ideas an empirical basis. Marx's idea of a revolution was born out of this exploitation. In Das Kapital, he laid out his analysis of how capitalism works, emphasizing that the value of goods comes from labor and that workers were being robbed of the fruits of their work. The push for a classless society wasn't only about wealth but also about power. Marx argued that the state, which was controlled by the ruling class, would need to be dismantled. He predicted that the working class would rise up and seize control, establishing a dictatorship of the proletariat. While this concept was central to Marxism, its real-world applications would evolve, and not always in the way Marx envisioned. Chapter 2: Socialism versus Capitalism. The clash of titans. At the heart of socialism is a belief in fairness. It's about leveling the playing field, ensuring that everyone has access to what they need to thrive. Capitalism, on the other hand, is built on competition, where some succeed while others fail. In capitalist systems, wealth is often concentrated in the hands of a few. This unequal distribution of wealth is something that socialists criticize. They argue that society should be organized in a way that benefits the many, not just the few. Socialism seeks to control or limit private property, especially in industries that impact the public, like healthcare or energy. In contrast, capitalism thrives on private ownership and the belief that competition drives innovation. This difference is key. While socialism may call for nationalization, where the government owns and operates key industries, capitalism supports privatization, where private companies control resources. While many see these two systems as opposites, they often exist together in what's known as a mixed economy. In many countries, elements of both systems coexist. For example, in the United States, a capitalist economy operates alongside social safety nets like Social Security, Medicare, and public education. In countries like Sweden and Denmark, a capitalist economy works alongside a comprehensive welfare state that provides free healthcare, education, and generous social benefits. Despite their differences, the two systems sometimes benefit each other. Some argue that capitalism, with its focus on efficiency and innovation, can help drive progress in areas like technology. On the other hand, social programs can reduce inequality, providing a safety net for the most vulnerable in society. According to a 2021 report by the OECD, countries with stronger social safety nets tend to have more stable economies and lower rates of poverty. Yet, the debate rages on. Capitalists argue that socialism stifles individual freedom and innovation. They point to the failures of socialist economies, like the collapse of the Soviet Union, to highlight its flaws. Socialists, however, argue that capitalism leads to inequality, environmental destruction, and an erosion of workers' rights. They believe that a system focused on collective well-being is the answer to global challenges. Chapter 3, From Theory to Practice, Real-World Socialism. When socialism moves from theory to practice, things often get complicated. One of the first countries to adopt socialism in a real, institutionalized way was the Soviet Union, founded in 1922 after the Bolshevik Revolution. The revolution, led by Lenin, was supposed to usher in a new era of equality. However, what followed was a totalitarian state under Joseph Stalin, with mass purges, forced collectivization, and the suppression of political freedoms. In Cuba, another example of socialism in practice, Fidel Castro's revolution in 1959 promised equality and social justice. While Castro's government did provide healthcare and education to all, it also severely restricted personal freedoms, including freedom of speech and political opposition. A study by the Cato Institute in 2020 found that Cuba's socialist policies have led to both positive outcomes, like universal literacy, and significant economic challenges. In contrast, countries like Sweden and Denmark have successfully integrated socialist policies into a capitalist framework. These countries are often cited as examples of democratic socialism. In Sweden, for example, healthcare, education, and pensions are provided by the government, funded by high taxes. The result? A high standard of living, low levels of poverty, and one of the world's highest life expectancies. The World Happiness Report 2023 ranked Denmark as the second happiest country in the world, a testament to the success of its welfare state. But socialism isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Different countries have implemented socialist policies in different ways. Some have focused on nationalizing industries, while others have emphasized wealth redistribution. And while some socialist governments have provided benefits like universal healthcare, they've struggled with inefficiency, corruption, and lack of innovation. One of the key challenges for socialist governments is balancing the needs of the people with the resources available. While some socialist programs, like universal healthcare and free education, have proved successful, others, like nationalization of industries, have struggled. In Venezuela, for example, socialist policies under Hugo Chavez were initially popular, but the country soon faced economic collapse. According to the World Bank, Venezuela's economy contracted by over 50% between 2013 and 2019, largely due to mismanagement and falling oil prices. Socialism in practice often faces the challenge of turning idealistic goals into tangible results. While the vision of equality and fairness is compelling, the execution can be far more difficult. In the end, whether socialism works depends on a variety of factors, including political stability, economic conditions, and the willingness of governments to adapt to changing circumstances. Subscribe now. If you're enjoying this deep dive into socialism and want to learn more, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got plenty more eye-opening content coming your way. Chapter 4, The Myth of the Socialist State, Debunking Common Misconceptions. Socialism has been misunderstood for centuries. One of the most common myths is that socialism leads directly to dictatorship and oppression. People often point to the Soviet Union and say, "Look, that's socialism." However, the reality is far more complex. Socialism, in theory, is about equality, fairness, and community, not authoritarian rule. A key quote from the Communist Manifesto by Marx and Engels is, "The history of all hitherto societies is the history of class struggles." Socialism, at its core, isn't about creating authoritarian states. It's about restructuring society to reduce class divides and offer opportunities for all. But in some cases, leaders who have claimed to implement socialism have turned toward autocratic rule. Stalin, in the Soviet Union, is perhaps the most extreme example. However, modern socialism doesn't always follow this pattern. In democratic socialist countries, like those in Scandinavia, the aim is to use democratic institutions to bring about social justice. A 2021 report from the OECD shows that countries with social democratic policies, like Sweden, Finland, and Norway, have high standards of living and robust democratic systems. These countries have strong social safety nets, yet also uphold democratic principles and human rights. Another misconception is that socialism is about equalizing everyone's income. The goal isn't to make everyone equally wealthy, but to ensure that everyone has their basic needs met. This includes access to healthcare, education, and affordable housing. In reality, countries with more socialist policies, such as Denmark and Germany, still have wealthy citizens, but they also have high levels of economic mobility and relatively low poverty rates. According to Eurostat, Denmark has one of the lowest income inequality rates in the European Union, which is a direct result of its social policies. Socialism is also often linked to inefficiency. Critics argue that when the government controls industries, there's less incentive to innovate. Yet, data shows that countries like Norway, with extensive public sector involvement, have thriving economies. In fact, Norway's government controls significant sectors, like oil, but it also has one of the highest GDP per capita in the world. The World Bank lists Norway as a high-income country, showing that socialism doesn't always hinder economic success. Chapter 5, The New Wave, Democratic Socialism in the 21st Century. Democratic socialism is gaining traction in the 21st century, particularly in Western countries. Figures like Bernie Sanders in the US and Jeremy Corbyn in the UK have brought the term democratic socialism into the mainstream. Their focus is on policies that tackle wealth inequality, provide universal healthcare, and offer free higher education. Bernie Sanders, for example, has called for Medicare for All, a proposal that would create a single-payer healthcare system. Democratic socialism is different from traditional socialism because it doesn't aim to abolish capitalism entirely. Instead, it seeks to regulate capitalism in a way that benefits the public. This includes stronger labor rights, progressive taxation, and social programs that protect vulnerable groups. According to a 2020 poll by YouGov America, 43% of Americans aged 18–29 had a positive view of socialism, signaling a shift in political attitudes, especially among younger generations. A key feature of democratic socialism is the belief in democracy. Unlike totalitarian regimes that have claimed to be socialist, democratic socialists believe in free elections, human rights, and personal freedoms. The Scandinavian model of democratic socialism is often cited as a successful example. In countries like Sweden and Finland, citizens have access to universal healthcare, free education, and a strong welfare state, all while living in democratic societies. A defining moment for democratic socialism in the US came in 2016 when Bernie Sanders, running for president, drew huge crowds with his call for economic reform. His message was clear: the top 1% shouldn't control the wealth of the country. Sanders' campaign highlighted the growing divide between the rich and the poor, with statistics showing that in 2020, the richest 1% of Americans controlled 32% of the nation's wealth, according to Credit Suisse. Another aspect of democratic socialism is its emphasis on climate justice. Socialists argue that addressing the climate crisis requires large-scale government intervention and the transformation of industries that harm the environment. In 2020, Sanders proposed a Green New Deal, a plan to transition the US to renewable energy and create millions of jobs in the green sector. According to a University of California study, transitioning to renewable energy could create up to 25 million new jobs in the US. Chapter 6, The Future of Socialism, Is it the answer to global crises? As the world faces pressing issues like climate change, income inequality, and healthcare disparities, many are asking, can socialism offer the solutions? Some experts argue that socialism, especially in its democratic form, is the answer to these global crises. For instance, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed the fragility of healthcare systems worldwide, particularly in the US where millions lacked access to affordable care. Countries with universal healthcare systems, like Canada and the UK, have managed the crisis far better, with fewer deaths and lower overall costs. Socialism could also play a key role in addressing climate change. The capitalist system, critics argue, focuses too much on profit, leading to environmental destruction. Democratic socialists propose bold solutions like a Green New Deal, which would invest in renewable energy and ensure a just transition for workers in affected industries. The International Labour Organization estimates that transitioning to green jobs could create over 60 million new jobs worldwide by 2030. Socialism's focus on wealth redistribution also holds promise in addressing income inequality. In the US, the wealth gap has grown dramatically in recent decades. The top 1% now holds more wealth than the bottom 90% combined, according to Federal Reserve data. Socialists argue that policies like progressive taxation and universal social programs can level the playing field. A Pew Research study in 2019 found that 70% of Americans believe the government should do more to reduce income inequality. However, not everyone is convinced that socialism is the answer. Critics argue that it can lead to inefficiencies, as seen in countries like Venezuela, which faced economic collapse after years of socialist rule. But many point out that Venezuela's economic troubles were largely due to mismanagement and external factors, such as falling oil prices, rather than socialism itself. As the debate over socialism intensifies, one thing is clear: the world is changing, and so are our ideas about government and society. With growing concerns about inequality and climate change, socialist ideas are being reconsidered as potential solutions. Whether or not socialism can provide the answers to these global challenges remains to be seen. However, as we move forward, the conversation around socialism will likely continue to shape the future of our societies. Subscribe now. Enjoyed this breakdown? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more deep dives into politics and global systems.